So this afternoon's roundtable discussion is entitled LGBTQ plus choirs, care and activism since the COVID pandemic. My name's Thomas Hilder. I think when I introduced the whole event earlier today, I even forgot to mention my name. So now you finally know. I'm based in Trondheim, Norway. I'm associate professor in ethnomusikologie at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And I kind of wear several hats. I have different identities in different spaces, and one of those things is obviously a professor, associate professor in ethnomusikologie. And one of my main research projects at the moment is on LGBTQ plus choirs. I'm focusing on 3 cities in a European context: Warsaw, Rome, and London. And I also am a musician myself. I'm a violinist and also a choral singer. So I've been performing in LGBTQ plus musical spaces for the last 10 years, in fact. I also helped build up our local queer choir in Trondheim called Hsien over the last 4.5 years. So I have these different identities as researcher, activist, and musician. And I know that many of the speakers today share those complicated identities where we're not quite sure who we are in different spaces. And I'm really interested in exploring those kinds of issues in the conversation today. I would just like to say a few things about LGBTQ plus choirs. We could trace the history of these choirs back to 1978, to the Anacrusis choir that was founded in Philadelphia with a kind of feminist mission. LGBTQ plus choirs sprung up in a European context from 1982 onwards, and 1983 was the founding of the Pink Singers, which Hsien is also a member of, which was the very first mixed LGBTQ plus choir in a European context. Pink Singers is from London. And since then, this scene has expanded rapidly throughout many cities and other places around the world, especially in the last 10, 15 years. And we, in these spaces, we have a very diverse repertoire. We have different performance styles. We introduce choreography often. We have different costumes. And although we often think of choirs as being kind of conservative spaces for maintaining traditions, we actually prove that choirs are a very flexible, kind of malleable space where we can actually think about ideas of inclusion and diversity in new ways, especially in a kind of musical setting. And part of the thing that I really want us to explore today is the issue of care. So I mentioned some issues about care earlier in the introduction. I just wanted to go back to one quote again by Maria Puig de la Bella Casa in her book Matters of Care, published in 2017, where she writes, quote, "An ethics of care cannot be about a realm of normative obligations, but rather about thick, impure involvement in a world where the question of how to care needs to be posed." So I'd really like for us to have in this conversation a real kind of reflection on those practices that we bring through our own long-term engagement and experience with working with these spaces. So I don't want to actually introduce all of you with all your amazing achievements, because I would like you to do that all yourselves. So I'll just mention you all by name for a start. Hsien, London. Misza Czerniak from Warsaw. Mary Ellen Kitchens from Munich. And Holly Patch from Dortmund. We have online Riccardo Strappaghetti. If we could show actually the gallery where we have Riccardo up there, and also Snorre Sletten, who is the conductor of our choir in Trondheim. So, I would just invite you to all introduce yourselves with a few things about what you do.
I have the mic, so I guess I'll get it started. Yeah, I'm Holly Patch. I use the pronoun she, her. I like Thomas said, am a research associate at the Technical University of Dortmund in sociology of gender relations. I am working on my PhD at the University of Bielefeld, also in sociology, but I have a different background. I come out of interdisciplinary gender studies programs, both in my BA and in my MA. I also studied vocal performance in undergrad, and so I think that was already the beginnings, doing two different kinds of study programs and bringing them together already at the undergraduate level has brought me to where I am now with this project on trans vocality. I just realized that I have not ever sung in an LGBTQ choir or a queer choir space, although I did sing in several choirs throughout my training. And I think most importantly, I sang with the Oakdale Community Choir. It's run by Mary Cohen in Iowa City, Coralville, a choir with outside members and inside members of incarcerated people at the Oakdale Community Correctional Facility. I think I've got the name wrong. But that was my first experience thinking about choral singing or collective music making and social justice, bringing them in combination. Yeah, so that's a bit about the background that brought me to this project on trans vocality, for which I did ethnographic fieldwork with the Trans Chorus of Los Angeles. I did in-depth interviews with members of the chorus, different gender identification, different gender presentation, different voice parts, changing voice parts, and I did participant observation with them as well. And I think we will be discussing some of those insights today in this discussion. Yeah, I think I'll hand it off now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Misza Czerniak, yes, pronounced he, him. I am originally Russian, which has become an even more awkward thing to say out loud this year than in previous years. But I've been living for 11 years in Poland, and I'm trained as a choral conductor, both in Russia and in Poland, and I'm not a scholar. I don't know if it's an awkward thing to say in this setting or not, but I'm coming into this field from an activist and from a participant perspective. I've been an activist for many years in different fields, but also in LGBT plus activism and also at the intersection of LGBT plus issues and religion, which is a difficult topic for Eastern Europe particularly. And so 8 years ago I founded the first Polish, back then it was the only, and LGBTQ plus choir, plus allies and friends, obviously, and as first and foremost as a form of activism for members of the community who felt that they lack that they lack diversity of options of how to be an activist in the field, and so that attracted quite a lot of attention initially. Right now we are roughly 55 members, and there's one more choir also in Krakow, in the south of Poland, which was founded actually independently, but a couple of months after us. And also one other hat here, I probably can say that I'm a board member of Legato Association of LGBT plus choirs in Europe. And yeah, that's probably it for me.
Thanks, Misza. I don't know how to follow that up. My name is Hsien. Nice to meet you all. I think I've spoken to some of you already. I'm originally from Singapore, but I've lived in the UK now for just over 30 years. Like most people in this group, we've sung in choirs ever since we were children. And I first joined a gay choir, an LGBT choir in London in 2002. So that's my start of my LGBTQ choir journey. I have to say it was the most amazing experience. I joined the Pink Singers, and it was the first time that I met a lot of people who were like me. And talking about safer spaces, this was my go-to safer space. Because of that, I think I discovered the power that LGBTQ choirs have, and I was very keen to make sure that this was shared with other LGBTQ choirs. So in 2015, I set up an organization. In fact, no, before that, in 2013, I set up an organization called Proud Voices UK and Ireland, which brings together all the LGBTQ choirs across the UK and Ireland. We number about 60 choirs at the minute. And then a couple of years after that, because I'm from Singapore, I returned to Singapore to meet up with gay choir there. And from there, we developed links with other choirs in Asia. And then Proud Voices Asia was born in 2014. We are now about 30 choirs, mainly in China and Japan, but also in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and one choir in West Asia as well. So my experience of choirs is that they are incredible, and I would like to talk a lot more about them. The pandemic has unfortunately put quite heavy brakes on what was something that was developing momentum, but we are picking up now again.
What a networker you are. Yes. My name is Mary Ellen Kitchens, she, her. Thank you, Thomas, for putting together this group, working together with us and those online also. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and I've learned in the sessions that have taken place today already many things that will be useful in my choir work and my musical work. I trained as a musicologist a long time back in the United States, and then in Paris and in Munich. And that is where I've lived for even longer than you have lived in the UK. I work, traditionally I've worked with choirs and orchestras, sort of well-versed amateur groups for a long period of time already, but in the middle of the 2000 years, around 2005, I founded the Rainbow Choir Munich, Regenbogenchor München, which is one of the 7 LGBTQI ensembles in Munich. And we've been existing, singing since then. And about 10 years later, we founded the Rainbow Sound Orchestra Munich. That was sort of a prelude to the Various Voices Festival in 2018. So those are the groups that I work with, and I think the question of care, of community, of working together in these groups is an essential one, and it has become more essential since the pandemic arrived.
Thank you very much. Riccardo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I would like to thank, first of all, Thomas very much for the opportunity to be here, even though I'm not there personally. I was planned to be there, but I had an unexpected event, so I couldn't be there in person. My name is Riccardo Strappaghetti, he, him. I'm from Italy. I'm based in Perugia, central Italy. And I'm part of the local LGBT choir in Perugia, which is called Omphalos Voices, that I contributed to found it in 2015. I had an experience as a singer in amateur groups for several years, when in 2015 we tried with some friends to found a LGBT choir. This choir was one of the first choir in a small, medium-sized city in Italy. After a few years, we also tried to found an association, Italian national association, which is called Chromatica. And I'm a part of the board of Chromatica Association, which is an umbrella organization that gathered together 15 choirs, LGBT choirs all over Italy, that cooperate and work together to support our choral activism in Italy, and to create the festival, Italian LGBT Choir Festival, which is called Chromatica. And first edition was in 2015, and now after the 2 years of pandemic, we try to make another edition of the festival, which will be in Rome, capital city of Italy, next June. So we try to do a good festival after 2 years. We couldn't do it in Italy. thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I would like to greet you warmly, each of you.
Thank you, Riccardo. Snorre, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So, yeah, I'm Snorre, and my pronouns are they, them. And in Norwegian, I use the pronoun hen. And I conduct the choir Kor Hen in Trondheim. And as you can imagine, there is a pun going on in the name with the hen pronoun. Yeah, so this is the choir that Thomas was board leader of. Yeah, I've also Thomas was my supervisor during my master thesis I finished last year, and it was about student choirs in a gender and queer perspective. So I went to Tromsø, that's another town in Norway, to do research of the student choirs there. Yeah, it was really interesting, and yeah, I was looking at the different choirs and how they kind of perform genders, and of course Judith Butler was very relevant there. Yeah, and unfortunately I couldn't be in Vienna today because I had a concert yesterday with Kor Hen. And just to mention the occasion, yesterday was actually the 50 years anniversary of the Norwegian law that criminalized homosexuality was removed back in 1972. So, yeah, I think that would be what I had to say about myself.
Thank you very much, Snorre, and it was very sad for me to not be at the concert last night. That was the first time I haven't been with my choir at a concert. It's really wonderful to be able to have this discussion with all of you because I've got to know you in different ways at different times over the last 6, 7, 8 years, and I'm sure we're going to have a really lovely conversation today. I'd like to start with us reflecting about this idea of care and the histories of care that we bring to these choral spaces. So we often talk about LGBTQ plus choirs being safe spaces, and this is very much, you know, moving on from, drawing on from your earlier presentation, Emilia. And so we think about these choirs as a kind of form of musical asylum beyond a transphobic, biphobic, and homophobic society, and a way of building new forms of kinship in order for the creation of new networks of care, queer care, we might call it. And there are many examples, for examples, of choirs emerging from HIV/AIDS activism, such as the London Gay Men's Chorus, but we could also know some members, but we also know many members of the LGBTQ plus community who do not necessarily feel safe in queer spaces. So our choirs have been often the messy spaces where the hierarchies between different members of LGBTQ plus communities are negotiated. They're one of the few spaces where actually spaces for mixed genders within the LGBTQ plus community. And new choirs often are forged in order to meet the needs of certain marginalized community members. For example, we've seen the emergence of trans choirs in the last decade. So recently, with more general rising concerns of mental health, studies have shown the positive impact of communal singing on health in general. So from a historical perspective, I like to pose this question to you all. How have our choirs offered forms of care to the specific but also diverse experiences of our local LGBTQ plus communities? I wondered who would like to take the mic first. That includes both Riccardo and Snorre as well. Mariann?
Yeah, I can start with one topic. I think this is many-faceted. I think there are all different aspects of care, of well-being, of the largest word is good community feeling in a choir. One thing that I think about very much myself, and it starts at the beginning of the whole process, is which pieces we sing, which texts we sing, and whether or not we adjust text of pieces that we choose that might not be especially appropriate for our choirs to our special means. And this is something that really, it's one of the very first things I consider when I'm choosing music. I love to choose wonderful music that I think will sound wonderful with my choir. I have the sound of my group in my ear, although it's changed a little bit with Corona now. But I do have this vision of how a piece will sing or be sung and sound. But if the text, the piece can be wonderful and especially fitting for my group, but if the text is not appropriate or is not inclusive or has anything that I think might not go down too well with the choir, then it would tend to exclude it or start thinking about how to retext. And that process is something that of course should be and can be communal. It's something you can use in a choir, and you can give the choir homework, or they can give you homework to work on a text that would reflect where the group is at a given moment, maybe something that the group is working on or something that is happening in the world. It's something that, given our current world situation, is more important than ever. And there's nothing like a choir singing out something that it believes in. There's nothing like that. I think that's where I would start.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with all of that. I would say that I would like to approach that from a slightly different perspective. I think that, when it comes to choirs, one thing I always ask is, why is that choir there? What are they doing? What are their objective? And very often when it comes to LGBT choirs in particular, it's about a combination of music leading to the development of a community space, then leading on to a shared communal sense of identity, which then comes to a communal expression of pride in the public realm. And this is kind of the pathway that most of our choirs take. And so the question then becomes, how can we, as choirs, facilitate all of this happening? By choosing the right kind of music, by creating the social spaces where this kind of interaction and conversations can take place, by communal activities, both performance and social, that enable that linkages to happen, and then from there then taking it onto the road, taking it into performance spaces, taking it to pride marches, taking it to other places where that community can be then visually and audibly expressed. That's my approach to LGBT choirs.
Maybe you want to go online? Just not to be dominating from here.
Riccardo or Snorre, would you like to go next?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very good. See, my approach about LGBT choir as a musician and a singer in an amateur groups before LGBT choirs is of course focusing on artistic and artistic meaning of the performance of the choir, but also focusing on the social practice about this gathering together of the singers, because singing together in a safe place like LGBT contest can create bonds between singers and between the community. And also it's very important for us, for our choir, it's very important to send a message to the audience on a public ground, for instance, in the city, and to connect to the others cultural institutions. Like, for instance, we had experience to share music with university choirs, or maybe high school choirs, and we had this kind of experiences that create a very important situation for our choir. And for instance, for the members of the choir that show themselves in an audience, like LGBT choirs, empower people like in front of the public audience in the city, for instance. And of course, for us, it's very important, as most of you told before, the repertoire. We tried to focus in on the repertoire as well. For instance, creating new composition with the help of the composers that, for instance, last year, no, 2 years ago, we tried to turn in music lyrics of the important philosopher in Perugia, which is called Aldo Capitini, which is a non-violent philosopher. So for these days can be very meaningful. And we try to communicate this this message to how can I say, to not only by the feeling of the music, but also with the meaning of the lyrics, the meaning of the message we try to communicate to the audience.
Thank you. Misza, would you like to?
Okay. Maybe I'd like to make some kind of a step back and just to without, how to say, praising ourselves too much, but say that the very existence of those choirs is a form of care. And we cannot underestimate, I mean, this is enormous. For people, especially in hostile environments, the fact that they have a space where they can just be themselves and let down their guard and, you know, just stop proving anything to themselves, to the world, especially to their hostile families, because like Poland is a country of very serious religious upbringing, and I'm not trying to say, like I said, anything bad about religion per se, because I also work in this field, but also quite a few people in our community in Poland and in our choir have difficult relations with their families and they lack acceptance. And this is their chosen family. This is the place where they grow into being a member of a circle. It's their family of choice. And so the very existence of those things is a form of caring for people's mental health, their well-being, their just harmonious being themselves, right? And so that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second one is, of course, that people grow to be kind of friends. It's not that this is how they naturally become friends with someone with growing up or attending school. So maybe these people are not whom they would have chosen to be in their natural circle of friends, but they grow into having some kind of closer friendship there. The experiences, sometimes these experiences are harsh because sometimes what we've had to endure in the last 4 years, actually, our choir started in 2014, and then in 2015, Poland joined the countries with the right turn and the populist regime grabbing power. So we were going through all of this, scapegoating of the queer community in Poland together. We were observing the collapse of, the country sliding towards, practices of exclusion like LGBT-free zones and the likes. So in the situation when the world shouts at you that you are not normal, that you have to hide your colors or whatever, this was the place where people could sometimes share their anger, sometimes go to protesting together, and that's quite a lot what we've been doing quite a lot over these years. Even if we are not singing at those protests, that we were at some, but we went there and we went there, and we've had plenty of occasions to go out in the streets for the queer community, but also for the migrants in a couple of years ago, and also for the females issues that were, as you know, in Poland were a great problem in the last couple of years, pre-pandemic and early pandemic days, with the reproductive rights. So we've had plenty of occasions to support each other, to to tend to each other's wounds in terms of how we survive through all of this, but also to celebrate some even small gains and small successes. And again, this space turns out to be a small glimpse of normality. And I'm using the word normality in a positive way here, not as normative, but like something as how things can be. And it's a glimpse of hopefully the future, and I think that has been the experience that is crucial for people. And of course, not everyone gains this experience in a choral setting, but I think such spaces should be in every aspect of human existence. I would say we need such spaces in hostile countries like Poland or Russia. And one more thing I would say, just if for us it was important to care for each other in mentally disturbing situations like the pressure from the government, my thoughts are now about the, for example, Ukrainian choirs that we have now who are tending to each other's needs and wounds literally in times of war. So I think these groups have enormous importance.
Yeah, what I've learned from and about the TCLA resonates with everything that's been mentioned so far. To talk about historical origins of the chorus, the chorus was formed in 2015, and it was a passion project of the artistic director at the time following the death of Leila Alcorn in Ohio. So that speaks to inherently out of a sense of establishing care for one's community through creating a choir. But I don't think that care is maybe the word that I would apply to this chorus. It's definitely not the discursive word being used in their space. But this chorus was established as outward-oriented, rather focused in activism through their visibility, through their presence. And the word I've used to talk about the chorus is flourishing, because they've shown not only a freedom from, in the sense of a safe space away from transphobia, for example, but it's also about a freedom too. So there's not a lot of discursive establishing of what are the terms of how we interact with each other in this space, but the caring practices are already there. I think they're well practiced with these people in various different spaces, and I think there was a relief coming to this chorus that it didn't have to be another safe space, another space to talk about trans existence and the hardships. They got to go there and sing, and that was the point. It didn't matter what the politics of the space were, or if they really agreed with each other. And I think there's a lot of freedom in that. So I just want to make that clarification about the emergence of this trans chorus was not about needing their own space to be safe, but really to fill the choral form with trans voices, be heard and be seen in their flourishing. But caring practices, of course, exist in this space, from how they treat each other to not only singing and you know, having this physical touch being a kind of healing, a kind of care for one another, but also breaking for dinner together within this choral space. So lots of ways that I think care can be imagined within this group. Yeah. But I guess I was calling for but the word I would stress would be flourishing is what happens in this chorus.
Thank you. Snorre, would you like to?
Yeah. I feel that I think it's been very important for queer people to be joining a choir, and not only queer choir, like specifically queer choir, but also every other choir. Like in my research, I got the impression that there were a significant amount of queer people in the choirs, although they were not specifically queer choirs. And yeah, and it's like, why is it important, and why? And I would suggest, like, the main reason is just by gathering together and like do something together. And I think that's probably the most important thing. You create this safe space, and yeah, so yeah, that was also, I would like to raise the question again from the last presentation, this safe spaces. Are the safe spaces safe, and what makes them safe? And yeah, just actually be critical about yeah, if they are safe, because yeah, just by calling it safe space doesn't make it safe for everybody, and we have to know about what makes them safe, and like, not only just say that you shouldn't call people like this and like that, and but really think about why you should do that, and so everybody agree. Because I've been thinking about this lately, that I mean, it's also kind of a restriction, and I'm not trying to sound very old-fashioned, like, oh, you can't say anything these days, but yeah, just be a little critical in like both ways, I think would be wise. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what Holly said earlier, because I totally agree with that. You know, I think that not all choirs need to be about creating a safe space. It is about celebration. It's about being out there and being heard. But I think many choirs, certainly in the West, come out of a very activist history. Certainly the Pink Singers that I'm in has a very activist history. It came out of that, you know, the mid-80s in the UK, when there were lots of protests going on against Section 28 about the closure of the mines. So there was a real sort of desire to be out there and be heard, and that has continued to today. I spoke about the Japanese choirs really briefly in one of the earlier presentations, but many of the Japanese choirs, within the constraints of the Japanese culture, can only express themselves in very particular ways, and protest is not necessarily one of those ways. And so these choirs form because they really love a particular style of music. Often it's the King Singers for some reason. And and so you have lots of choirs around Japan, LGBT choirs around Japan, who gather because they want to sing a particular style of music. And there's lots of joy and enjoyment in that. And the fact that you're getting together with people who have similar minds in a shared space is already a wonderful act of care. But their focus is not about pushing the agenda or whatever forward.
Great, thank you very much. I like this whole idea of drawing from Sarah Ahmed, this idea that we don't just create documents, but we actively put those documents into practice. They become part of our embodied knowledge and routines within these spaces, and we can think about safety as tending to each other's wounds. I thought that was a really wonderful way of putting it, Misza, but also this idea of flourishing as well. Thank you, Holly. So my next question actually is about specifically COVID. So the COVID pandemic has obviously offered a huge challenge to, well, the whole world, and also especially to our work. So rehearsals and concerts were initially banned and have since been subject to restrictions of different degrees depending on the regional context, very much owing to concerns that communal singing enables greater transmission of COVID. Queer people are arguably quite skilled in dealing with crises, yet studies have shown that LGBTQ plus youth especially have suffered greatly through social isolation. And our choral work and our activism relies so heavily on being physically present with one another and, of course, being visible in public. So I've witnessed through my research how choirs have dealt with these challenges in multiple and creative ways. I'm sure many of us have seen virtual choir videos shared on social media, and that's been very prominent also within our communities. So how have our musical practices, organizing strategies, and politics been shaped by the challenges of the COVID pandemic as we have searched for new ways to care for our communities?
Okay, I'm going to kick this one off. This is quite a big topic, I have to say. As I said, most choirs sing music because they enjoy it and because they want to be better and they want to perform. But the music and the performance is not the end in itself. It is a means towards creating a community and towards expressions of pride for some choirs. So when the pandemic hit, suddenly the very fundamental root of what we did suddenly was ripped out from under us. And I think our choirs all went into this real crisis of confidence. How could we maintain our communities when the thing that we gathered to do could no longer be done? And this was a huge question that no one really had answers to. I think in Proud Voices UK and Ireland, we organized several seminars, and one of the first ones was really about trying to challenge the rules that were put in front of us. Like, one of the reasons that first of all, choral activity was portrayed as the most dangerous activity that you could possibly do. When you said, "Oh, I'm in a choir," they go, "Why, God, that's dangerous." I mean, that has never happened before. So this was really, it was a real challenge to us, and so we're looking at ways, and we're still looking at ways to, in our neoliberal society, provide evidence that we have value, because there were lots of other activities that could be done which were arguably as dangerous, but were permitted because they provided economic value. And so, unfortunately, that was one of the things that we had to address. The other things that we organized seminars around were like how to keep people engaged, and that was really difficult because many choirs are contingent upon rehearsals. They pick up funding at rehearsals. People pay money to attend a rehearsal, and then that money then goes on to pay a musical director. What happens when you don't gather for musical sessions? Where does that money come from? How do you collect that money? So there was a lot of fundamental infrastructure questions that needed to be answered as well. The idea of singing online, after 2 years of it, I'm so over it. It is not satisfying at all. You don't get any sense of the harmonies. You don't get one of the wonderful things about being in a choir and singing live is that when you sing, you can hear other people and you can hear the chords forming. And if a chord slightly breaks, everyone else adjusts automatically to it, to repair it. And it's that dynamic response which you just cannot get on a Zoom call and you cannot get in a virtual choir. And I just miss that so much. I remember the very first time I got together with some friends and we were at the Barbican in London with lovely acoustic because there were lots of concrete walls and we were outside. And I cried because it was the first time in about a year and a half that I could hear that again, and I remembered what it felt like. So in terms of trying to build the community again while we're waiting for that process to come back, I guess certainly in the Pink Singers, we looked at what we were fundamentally about as a choir, and we're very proud to be a mixed gender, mixed sexuality choir, and we're diverse in lots of many other ways as well in terms of ethnicity, religious belief, ability and disability. And so we thought, well, here's our chance to really explore that with other people. Let's talk about it. Let's platform people and hear their stories. And so we created a series of Zoom calls, which were interactive, with members of the choir from different groups. We had talks about the AIDS crisis and people's experience of AIDS that was precipitated by a TV show called It's a Sin. And so we had a conversation called It's a Sin. We had a talk with a former member of the Pink Singers who is a member of the Vogue scene up in Manchester. These things are all on YouTube. Please go look them up. They are really deeply fascinating, to me at least. And we've also had talks around for instance, religion, religious minorities. So we invited speakers in to talk about Islam and LGBT as a way of sort of getting people talking about the kind of diversity that we really want to promote as a choir. And I believe that these conversations did bring people together. We're working on Misza and I are working on a project together as well, talking about queer lives in the countries that we're from. And we did this as a choral collaboration where we've run a series of seminars with a variety of speakers in which our choirs participate, and we've had sessions on queer lives in Russia, queer lives in Poland, and queer lives in the UK. And it just highlights some of the issues, the similarities, and also some of the different issues that exist across our different communities as well. So I think as I was telling Mariann earlier, the pandemic has been a real struggle, but it has also given us an opportunity to pause and reflect about the values of our community, and then to try to find ways in which we could really reinforce these values in ways that we couldn't before, because we were so on the next performance is coming up, let's rehearse, next performance is coming up, let's rehearse. And we had no time to think about that. About all of the fundamentals while we were on that sort of hamster wheel almost.
Yes, I would agree completely that it's a time for reinvention, not of the wheel, but of the choir, in the sense that we were forced to take pause. I must say, about 1 week after things all closed down, I went right back online. I tried to do as much as I could musically, but also socially. Online, it was a huge effort. It was rethinking every week. It was a lot of discussion with the board and with individual members of the group, trying to be inclusive. Also in the online situation, not everyone has the same approach to working online. It's completely different. Each of us has a different feeling about that. And there were people who just said, I can't imagine working online. Well, how do you pick them up? Can you meet one-on-one because only that is allowed? Or could you meet in a certain part of the city with certain part of the group? We tried basically every model that we could think of. One thing that I concentrated on a lot was giving, at least in the first phase, because it made a lot of sense. I worked on giving background to the pieces that we were working on, that perhaps had even been created for us. So I pulled in the composers, many of them women composers, is a specialty of mine, and from afar also. So we would meet online and discuss the backgrounds, and maybe that person would play the piece for us. We experimented with singing. You can't really sing together via Zoom, not too many people, and nothing fast for sure. But we tried singing in phrases so that we could hear the different voices a little bit, at least for those who felt comfortable in doing so. Not everyone did. A held chord can be sung with an open mic. It doesn't sound too great, but you hear the other voices a little bit. So the loneliness that happened from not being able to go to choir on Monday or on Wednesday could be met a little bit, at least in the beginning phase. I think with time that got old. I felt that it was hard to sort of maintain stamina during that time. And of course, we used every opportunity when there were at least brief openings or openings for a few people to meet up, to meet in smaller groups, to work in a hybrid fashion, or just to work as a quartet. All of these different, we tried everything. We really tried everything. But what was a special joy was really meeting with the creators of our pieces online, or even working on creating new ideas and new pieces during this phase, just thinking ahead, thinking about future projects. That was certainly a topic as well.
Sure. I did my fieldwork with the TCLA before the pandemic, but I've kept up with what they've been producing since then. One thing I wanted to mention was that the Gay and Lesbian Association of Choruses had planned their festival to feature the trans choruses, but that was, of course, canceled because of the pandemic. And instead, they had on Trans Day of Resilience in November 2019, they did a Roses concert of past, present, and future trans resilience that featured the outward-oriented trans-identified choruses of the gala choruses. There is a clip of that. I don't know if that's the moment for it. But that was, I think, a big moment in terms of trans choral activity out there, yeah. So it happened in pandemic still. They were able to make that happen.
Snorre, did you want to say something about our experiences in Trondheim?
Yes. I am, as I mentioned, I conduct Korhen, but I'm also conducting a female choir. Also, I am singing in a semi-professional choir. So we had some different experiences during the lockdown and this Corona times. I would like to share a little bit. For example, in the semi-professional choir, we were kind of striving to continue, and people we were like forcing all the kind of rules, how we should perform, like we should stand 2 meters apart that way and then 4 meters apart that way, and then we just persisted on like rehearsing, and at one time we weren't allowed to perform, but we were not allowed to rehearse, yeah, it was really hard. And then we had to move location, like we had to sing in a huge hallway or corridor, and yeah, it was really hard. And I think the Norwegian, like the cultural life has really been like bleeding lately, and it's interesting to see that they had so many rules about cultural life, but then they didn't have as many rules as for example bar life, like going out and drinking, and then it's kind of obvious there is a economy reason for this. And I just want to mention one of the really stupid rules were that you could have 200 people in the audience if the chairs were stuck in the floor, and just strange things like that. So it has been really hard. And for the choral practices, it has been really hard. And we tried it, as you mentioned, we tried the video rehearsals. I mean, I hardly want to talk about it. It was terrible. But at least we get to see each other's faces. And I was singing in choirs in Tromsø, the other town I mentioned, and we had some kind of hangouts during video. We were kind of having a small party. In this occasion, actually, the Corona crisis kind of brought us together, because I was here in Trondheim, and then suddenly I could hang out with people in another town. And not to mention here, I can sit in my home and I can still participate in this conversation. So in that sense, things have changed, and maybe for the better. But in most cases, for the female choir, I mean, there were so many rules that we can't follow everything, so we just freeze kind of the activity. And I think the really problem with that was that people are getting used to not attending to rehearsals. They're just so, and I think that's the most dangerous thing about the whole thing is that, yeah, they're getting used to not be there. They got not so, like, for example, a Tuesday is not a rehearse day anymore. It's like not the sacred thing that I do on a Tuesday. And I think that's been really a problem. And for future, like how to maintain a choir, I think maybe the most important is the gathering and the community, and just continue. It is a sacred time we have to like maintain. And of course, if people are sick and cannot attend, then that's fine. But we should try to have the rehearsal anyway. So we rehearse even if there's only a couple of people, we can rehearse, or we can drink coffee, or we can just chat. But just maintaining the occasion, I think, is really important. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Snorre. And that makes me think of also the whole logistical issues, which are often the responsibility of organizers as well. And so I can just relate my own experiences within those 2 years of having to constantly read the latest guidelines, information, work out how we're going to make this work in the space that we have for free. Oh no, we can't do it here because there's not enough room. We have to find somewhere else. There were so many balls up in the air that just each week there was just all these question marks. I was just exhausted, and I think I just experienced a kind of burnout and actually just had to like take it a bit easier because of the amount of labor involved in doing that. So all these things that aren't actually, you know, visible to wider audiences as well, the huge amounts of labor that goes into our efforts. Unpaid care, another example, which we do with a lot of love and with joy as well. Riccardo, did you want to add something about your experiences in Perugia and more generally in Italy?
Yes. Yeah, pandemic is such a topic during last 2 years. And yeah, during pandemic has been very challenging to all the group that are based on volunteering job, such as our choirs, and that normally they were used to leave the spaces of the cities, such as the streets, for instance, for prides or concert hall, for sharing music with an audience, or even LGBT venues for specific events of the community. So it was very challenging. Of course, as many choirs, we experimented singing via Zoom, but I can't lie to you, the experience was very frustrating. I think that the experience of all the Italian choirs is that we found very important support during the pandemic in the Chromatica network. In fact, we think about this, that we thought about this. Normally, even before pandemic, of course, each Chromatica choir, local choir, meets up in the, of course, local groups to create events, to share music. But we got used to work as a Chromatica network online, even without actually meeting a couple of times during the year. But we tried to use this experience so with to cooperate together online. And we tried not to transform our existing choir in a video virtual choir, because this experience for some choirs could be very frustrating, as I said before. But we tried to get the chance to create a new choir, a choir that doesn't exist in reality, because the members of this virtual choir can't gather together for rehearsal because of the distance. So we try to create this, which we call it Chromatica Choir, and we produced a video, a virtual choir, formed by more than 200 singers from all over Italy and even other parts of the world, because lots of singers abroad joined our choir, and we create this Bella Ciao virtual choir video, which is very. I remember that during the job of creating this choir, sharing the score, the tutorials, was very exciting, because we connected with people, with new singers, and we get the feelings that we were creating something new. We didn't just how can I say, surrogate our existing choir into a virtual choir, so that can be a frustrating experience. But we try to make something, to create a new choir, simply a new choir. So we produced this Bella Ciao virtual choir video, and we were very surprising that we had all this participation. I remember singers from London, Geneva, Bruxelles, even for Canada or Singapore. It was very, very exciting, and I think that gets it was very supportive and helped us to focus on the future projects. And yeah, I think this is the most interesting experience we did during the pandemic. And of course, also we had the chance to focus on discussion via, to focusing via Zoom about some LGBT issues involving choirs. And a group of us create a podcast in which we were speaking about different issues, for instance, like transgender voices, people inside our choir. So we interviewed people that we would like to speak up about some issue that normally during the normal, how can I say, normal activity of the choir, maybe we didn't focus so much in this activity. I mean, to share from choir to another choir, share together all these issues. So maybe these kind of issues were inside each choir, but we didn't get the chance before the pandemic period to share these topics with other choirs. So I think that these are two experiences that I can remember as positive, and we grow through this experience during this pandemic.
Thank you, Riccardo. Would this be the time to play actually the video of the virtual Chromatica choir?
Could I perhaps just add, because it reminds me so much of a project that we also did, and which caused even joy during this such a difficult time. We had a short term for it, was called the Emu project, that crazy bird. That stood for Edinburgh, Munich, and Ukraine. And this was a project put together by Munich Kiev Queer. Munich is a partner city actually to Kiev, but we sort of see that as a wider Ukraine connection. and Edinburgh. And this was a project that was put together at the beginning of 2021. We met 3 times online in the spring of 21, and then in the Advent phase with the Christmas meeting also in that year. It was Kathleen Croney with Loud and Proud. I see her online here in Edinburgh. Hello, Kathleen. And Olga Rubtsova, who was in Odessa and working together with some members of her choir. I think we will probably hear a word from her later on. It was a great pleasure, and one of the products of this project, it was unusual. There were more than 100 people participating from the 3 countries, and actually it was a woman called Stephanie Hügler and Samantha Seymour who put the project together. So thanks to those 2 as well. We did a little project which was a virtual video, just 1 minute long. It's the piece Love is Love is Love is Love by Abby Bettinas. I think it might be nice to have a look at that.
We have Olga Rubtsova also in the digital audience, and you wrote something in the chat. Would you like to read it out to us, or would you like us to read it? I can also read Olga's contribution to the discussion as well. So, due to the hostilities in Ukraine, some girls weren't able to go abroad, but still the majority remained, especially the guys who are not allowed to leave. At the same time, many people today are not even in their homes and not even in their cities. For all Ukrainians, the big question is, when can we stop fighting? Who better than representatives of the LGBTQ+ community to know how hard it is to defend their rights? We survived all the waves of Corona and hoped for this spring. I hope that our choirs will be able to sing together again, but today it seems impossible. Now the main question for us is to support those who have lost a lot, but keep hope. More than 20 people from several LGBTQ+ choirs in Ukraine are in need of banal things such as food and a place to live. Some organizations were able to organize shelters, but the issue of food and medicine remains relevant. I can't even imagine when the day will come for our songs. So thank you very much, Olga Rubtsova, who, if I'm not mistaken, is the musical director of Querty Queer in Odessa. We have been discussing for quite a while, and I did have kind of one other question which would open up a huge amount of discussion as well. But I didn't. I wanted to make sure that everyone also had a moment to ask questions. Misza, would you like to add something?
Just I didn't have the chance to say anything about the COVID.
Sorry.
No problem. Just a couple of things. I think we should be clear that this was a really experience of trauma for all of us. And I think we should learn to use that vocabulary about this experience, because it was 2 years. For our choir, this is 25% of our existence have been taken hostage by the COVID pandemic. So I think it's important that we recognize this, and if we're talking about care, that we know how to deal with this, and we know how to support each other in all of this. And also, I mean, one of the positive things that we've taken out of the COVID experience is the flexibility, but also acknowledging that we are not superhumans. So for example, I know in the first year of pandemic, I decided that I will pull together the voice rehearsals. So my time to the choir quadrupled. And the toll, personal and family, was rather serious. And in the second year, I said no. I said I won't be able to do this. But also, it taught us some other good things, like we got back to open air singing, which in the past we told ourselves, no, this is not gonna ever happen. We don't like singing open air, but this was actually a blessing for a couple of months. So flexibility, and also being very attentive and to what's happening for everyone, and even in the smaller parts of the choir, smaller groups, was important. And I think what also helped us survive is that we for some time, even when we abandoned singing, we stayed together just as a group of people who know each other and want to support each other. And yeah, so that was good. And we didn't also, push the choral agenda of the choir at any expense, because a friendly choir of ours made a retreat somewhere in September 2020, and it was a super spreading event for them. So I think being very flexible and it was a good thing. But also one anecdote about how much time it took. 2 of our choir members managed to become mothers over the time of pandemic. So like this was a really long time for all of us, and I think that's. The repercussions will be heard sometime after this, because some people said, for some people rehearsing online was okay, for some people it was so out of the question completely, and so on. So there will be more things. But again, this year we have now a more traumatic event. So it was very important to hear Olga's words. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you very much for all your contributions to the discussion. It's been wonderful talking with all of you and continuing our conversations that we began, some of you in the last year, but some of you many years before. It's been a wonderful privilege to have this conversation. Thank you very much, Riccardo, in Perugia.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Snorre.
Thank you. It's been an honor to participate.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Misza. Thank you, Hsien. And thank you, Mariann.
Many thanks. Bravo, Thomas.
And thank you also to Connie for supervising us.